Across the continent, we feel the ripple of distant conflicts reaching our ports, our budgets, and our shop shelves. The Middle East fighting has diverted ships into longer, costlier routes around the southern tip, and the costs find their way into everything. Fuel becomes volatile, planning turns into guesswork, and supply chains show cracks when a single waterway becomes risky. This is a global problem, but here in Africa, we feel it acutely because many of us import essentials, pay in hard currency, and rely on those same fragile routes. A 40% spike in supply chain costs is not an abstract line on a chart. It can decide whether a small business survives the month. It is why bread or medicine goes up and why national budgets strain under pressure. This is Africa Unrestricted. We speak from here with calm purpose, not to shout at the wind or blame faraway powers, but to work through the numbers and options that matter. The issue is not weakness, it is exposure, and exposure can be reduced through choices we control. We can decide how we trade with each other, how we build our infrastructure, how we manage finances, and how we design policy. Our playbook is a blueprint to harness our people, our capital, and our growing internal market to build resilience. We will not chase the drama of headlines. We will focus on the quiet work of building stronger systems, because that is how we reduce the tremors we feel when the world shudders. Our focus is agency, practical steps to protect people, strengthen markets from the inside out, and turn volatility into manageable risk. Let us speak plainly about what works at scale and how we can accelerate it together. When a primary trade artery like the Red Sea becomes risky, freight costs climb fast and thin margins vanish. In disruptions like these, supply chain costs can jump by about 40%, and the shock passes quickly to consumers. The practical response is diversification of where our goods come from and where our products go. The most logical place for that diversification is right next door. Intra-African trade is our strongest shield because shorter routes mean lower risk and faster adjustments. Trade among African nations has been rebounding, growing to roughly $81 billion in 2023, a directional sign that integration is taking root. The AFCFTA is the framework to lock this in. Implement common rules of origin, simplify and digitize border procedures, create predictable, efficient crossings that cut time and uncertainty. It should be easier for a factory in Accra to serve a customer in Lagos than one across an ocean. Build regional value chains so more of the value is created and kept within the continent. Instead of exporting raw minerals and importing finished goods, develop capacity to process and assemble here. Shorter routes are more transparent, easier to finance, and simpler to manage during shocks. When the next shock comes, our first and best option is to turn to each other because internal demand becomes a stabilizer. Current signals are encouraging. Non-tariff barrier cases are moving through the system faster, building confidence among traders. The power of planning ahead turns scarcity into stability and buys time when seas get rough. Some shocks cause sudden shortages of food or fuel, and the impact on households can be immediate. Strategic reserves are not glamorous, but they are highly effective shock absorbers. Modest, well-managed stores of staples and essential fuels buy time for markets to adjust. The key is clear governance and predictable release triggers that cushion volatility, not replace markets. Predictable releases dampen price spikes for the most vulnerable and discourage panic buying that worsens shortages. Think of reserves as national insurance that preserves order when external systems fail. In parallel, invest in producing essentials closer to home to shorten fragile supply lines. Ethiopia shows how coordinated industrial policy can grow manufacturing, create jobs, and reduce import dependence. Local production plus reserves creates a layered defense, immediate buffers for weeks or months, and structural capacity for the long term. The outcome is fewer emergencies and more predictable costs when global routes snarl. To make this system truly resilient, we must fix the financial plumbing that moves value as reliably as we move goods. A hidden vulnerability lies in payments moving through distant banks and volatile currencies. Over 80% of intra-African payments are routed offshore, adding days and fees that erode margins. When currencies swing, importers scramble for hard currency and pay too much for uncertainty. The fix is regional payment systems that keep transactions on continent and cut unnecessary conversions. Lower fees, fewer delays, and lower risk make trade with neighbors more attractive. When a Kenyan buyer pays a Ghanaian supplier directly in local currencies, we trim cost and time from every shipment. We also have a powerful financing tool, our institutional savings. Pension funds across Africa now hold roughly $1.1 trillion in assets. With the right channels, risk management, and pooled vehicles, a portion can finance infrastructure, manufacturing, and logistics. This capital can back local currency hedging tools, provide patient loans to industrial parks, and expand ports and railways. It strengthens our economies and delivers steady returns for savers. Finance should not be something that happens to us. It is a tool we shape for our priorities. By building our own payment rails and mobilizing domestic capital, we reduce exposure to foreign monetary shocks. The result is a more self-reliant financial ecosystem that can finance resilience on our terms. Goods cannot move without reliable routes, backups, and modern hubs. Logistics is where resilience meets reality. When major sea lanes are risky, it is our secondary airports, ports, and rails that keep goods moving. Resilience means distributed, redundant, and efficient networks that offer options. Modernize smaller ports so traffic can bypass choke points. Upgrade rail so cargo can shift modes when sea routes stall. Good roads turn detours into predictable alternatives. Spread capacity so risk is not concentrated in one canal, one port, or one border. Public-private partnerships are showing outsized impact and speed. DHL's intracontinental network and GoTrade investments are upgrading gateways and expanding air freight to second-tier cities. Redirected flows reduce pressure on a handful of major ports. Flexibility to switch routes preserves delivery schedules during global strain. Digitize port clearances for faster turnarounds and predictable costs. Harmonize trucking rules and, where feasible, standardize rail gauges to reduce friction. Build warehouses that connect producers to markets and protect perishable goods. Think of this as continental arteries that keep trade alive even when the world is under strain. All of this stands on a simple idea. Credibility is a nation's shock absorber. Businesses, investors, and households respond best when policy is predictable, transparent, and credible. Sound frameworks anchor expectations and lower the cost of shocks. Credible debt management reopens doors and creates room to act in crises. Several countries regaining market access is a signal that disciplined reform is working. South Africa shows how clear monetary targets and institutional credibility can steady markets. Adopting a more explicit 3% inflation target helped anchor expectations. Removal from the FATF gray list and a rating upgrade increased investor confidence. Lower risk premiums translate into cheaper, more accessible capital. That preserves import capacity for essentials and funds critical infrastructure when storms hit. The patient work of strong institutions pays dividends when volatility arrives. On trade frictions, the AFCFTA mechanism resolving cases in about 39 days builds trust for commerce. Put together, trade integration, reserves, payment rails, logistics, and credible policy turn a shock absorber into an engine of growth. We cannot stop global shocks, but we can change how they affect us. Shift more trade toward our continent to reduce exposure to distant choke points. Fix the payments so value moves quickly and cheaply between African partners. Build redundant logistics that keep goods flowing when routes fail. Maintain credible policies that let markets function through uncertainty. Use our own capital to finance resilience and returns at home. The signals are here already and point in one direction: a stronger, more integrated, more self-reliant Africa. This is structural, not slogan-driven. Practical systems that lower volatility, raise stability, and create sustainable jobs. We reinforce agency by committing to shared rules, shared infrastructure, and shared finance. The power to build this future is here in our hands, and we will use it with calm confidence.